Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. So today we're taking on a pretty massive mission. We're doing a deep dive into philosopher Alan Watts and his really provocative evaluations of religion, the concept of God, and that whole tension between belief and skepticism.
Yeah, it's a huge topic.
It really is. I mean, we're going to analyze the historical arguments about the origins of the Bible, explore how an atheist or maybe a skeptic might view objective religious authority, and unravel the psychology behind, like, actual mystical experiences.
Right, getting into what's actually happening in the brain.
Exactly. So whether you are a devout believer, a staunch atheist, or just insanely curious about human philosophy, this dive will challenge how you think about the ultimate source of truth.
It definitely shakes up the foundation no matter where you stand.
For sure. Oh, and real quick, just throwing this out there, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. Okay, so getting into it, there's this assumption, right, this idea ingrained in our culture that a sacred text just drops out of the sky.
Oh, like a fully formed, lever-bound book handed down from the clouds.
Yeah, completely intact, completely perfect. But Watts takes a hard look at the actual history, and it paints a very, very different picture. And I know you're going to unpack this for us today.
Yeah, and just to set this stage here, I really want to emphasize that I'm just neutrally unpacking Watts' perspective today. I'm not taking sides. I'm simply analyzing his fascinating claims about how human culture actually shapes what we call the divine.
Which is important because things get heated when you talk about this stuff.
Absolutely. So to understand Watts' evaluation of God and religion, we first have to look at his argument that totally dismantles the idea of objective scriptural authority, which is a point, that's often central to atheistic and skeptical critiques of religion.
Right, the historical illusion, basically.
He looks at the human fingerprints all over these texts. He points out that the Bible wasn't handed down intact. The canonical books, the ones that actually made the cut, were curated by human institutions.
Human committees, essentially.
Yes. For example, the Jewish authorities didn't finalize their canon until around 100 A.D. at the Synod of Jamnia. And the Catholic Church didn't officially decide on the New Testament until the Synod of Rome in 382 A.D.
Wait, 382? So that's centuries after the actual events.
Centuries, right.
That is wild to think about. I mean, you have to picture this not as some serene, magical moment, but literally a room full of flawed, politically motivated guys debating and basically voting on which texts become the absolute, undeniable truth for billions of people.
Right, and therefore, Watts argues, receiving the Bible historically relies entirely on the Church's say-so. There is no impartial judge to decide which religion is true because everyone is influenced by their own cultural standards.
So it's basically like walking into a courtroom where the judge and the defense attorney are the exact same person.
Exactly.
It's a blatantly unfair trial.
Yeah.
But you're trusting the authority of the book because the guys who made the book told you to trust their authority.
Yeah, it's totally circular. He actually quotes the philosopher de Tocqueville here, basically saying that authority always comes from the people choosing to believe it. It's a human choice.
Okay, I hear that, but what about the believer who argues God is the ultimate authority and Judgment Day will prove it? Like, they would say God guided those human committees.
Well, Watts has a direct counter-argument for that. He says waiting for Judgment Day isn't evidence right now. In this present moment, it remains simply an opinion.
Because it's based on faith, not objective proof.
Right, an opinion based on the opinions of others. So this really highlights his core point that all religious authority essentially boils down to human choice. And you can see why this strongly resonates with skeptical and atheistic evaluations of faith.
Right, because if Scripture is just a human-curated document and totally lacks objective, verifiable authority, it leaves a massive question. Does that mean all divine inspiration is fake? Like, are they just making it up?
Well, this is where the conversation shifts, because Watts doesn't say it's fake, he just completely redefines it.
Okay, so from skepticism to, like, a radical redefinition of what inspiration actually is.
Exactly. Watts completely rejects the idea of God dictating words to prophets, like a big voice in the sky spelling out sentences. He doesn't buy it. He even dismisses things like psychic automatic writing as, being really thin and superficial.
So no ghostwriters from heaven.
No heaven ghostwriters. Instead, he argues that true divine inspiration is entirely nonverbal.
Nonverbal.
Yeah, it's an indescribable wisdom. It's a mystical experience, or maybe this sudden, unexplainable feeling of deep love for humanity.
Oh, wow.
It might even come through archetypes from the collective unconscious, but it is fundamentally an internal experience, not an external broadcast.
So if we look at the old model, the traditional dictation thing, it's kind of like a CEO barking memos at a secretary to type up.
Exactly, yes.
But Watt's version is way more like an artist trying to paint a profound, abstract emotion they just felt.
That is a great way to put it.
But that leads to a huge problem, right? If divine inspiration is just a vague, non-verbal feeling or a dream, how on earth does it ever get turned into a highly structured, rigid religion with rules and Bibles?
Right, how do you get Leviticus from a vague feeling of love?
Exactly.
Well, Watts introduces this brilliant metaphor. He calls it the sound system metaphor.
Okay, tell me about the sound system.
So the human being receiving the inspiration, they are the sound system. Because that raw, mystical inspiration has to pass through a human vehicle to be communicated, it inevitably gets distorted.
Oh, because speakers have static or limited range.
Right. It gets distorted by the limits of their language, their available vocabulary, and crucially, the religious framework they were already raised in.
So they're forcing this unexplainable internal experience into the specific cultural folders they already have in their brain.
Precisely. The human sound system distorts the internal mystical experience. And because of that, the exact same realization of God manifests in wildly different, sometimes chaotic ways depending on geography.
So geography basically dictates theology.
Yes, and Watts gives this really memorable example to illustrate this.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine a guy from the American Bible Belt. Like, he's steeped in traditional Christianity. It's the only religious vocabulary he knows.
Right.
Now, imagine he has a profound mystical experience. He suddenly realizes deep down that he is one with God.
Oh, boy.
Because the Bible's the only vocabulary he has, he stands up in his town and claims, "I am Jesus Christ."
And people immediately think he's absolutely insane.
Exactly. Society totally rejects him because he doesn't fit the biblical prophecy. He didn't arrive from the heavens with legions of angels, so he's just crazy.
It's like trying to explain the color blue when your language only has words for different shades of red. You just sound insane to everyone else.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Now, Watts points out if that exact same man had read the Upanishads, the Indian philosophical text, he wouldn't say, "I am Jesus Christ." He would simply say, "We are all incarnations of God."
And Eastern society would just completely understand him.
Exactly. They wouldn't institutionalize him because their sound system, their cultural vocabulary, already accommodates that nonverbal experience.
Okay, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
Watts claims that Jesus of Nazareth was simply a regular human being, like Buddha or Ramana Maharshi, who had a colossal experience of cosmic consciousness. Since this is a highly contentious take, how does Watts justify stripping away Jesus' unique divinity without invalidating the entire Christian tradition?
Well, again, keeping my impartial stance here, just analyzing his framework for Watts,
Yeah.
equating Jesus to other mystics, doesn't invalidate the experience at all. Actually, it democratizes it.
Democratizes it? How so?
Because Watts believes that this cosmic consciousness can hit anyone, anywhere, regardless of their religion. He's essentially framing Jesus not as a singular, exclusive deity in the sky, but as an ultimate example of human mystical potential.
So Jesus was just a guy with a really, really good sound system.
Or rather, someone who had the profound experience, but had to explain it to a first-century Hebrew audience using their specific vocabulary.
Which means using words like Messiah and kingdom.
Exactly. So, having stripped away that traditional dictatorial concept of God, we have to ask, what does this universal cosmic consciousness actually feel like?
Yeah, let's turn to the mechanics of it. What is actually happening in the mind when someone has this awakening?
Watts breaks it down like this.
Yeah.
It is an overwhelming conviction of mistaken identity.
Mistaken identity. Like waking up and realizing you aren't who you thought you were.
Yes. The individual realizes that their separate ego, the everyday you, is just an act.
Yeah.
And their true self is an expression of an eternal X.
An eternal X.
Right, because boundaries just completely dissolve. The difference between what you do and what happens to you vanishes.
He uses breathing for this, right?
Yeah.
Like breathing is both voluntary and involuntary.
Yes. You can choose to take a breath, but when you stop thinking about it, the universe just breathes you.
Right, the body just does it.
So in this state, Watts says you feel like everything happening in the universe is just like you're breathing. Culturally, this ultimate reality gets different names.
Depending on the sound system again.
Right. The Hebrews call it the unnameable God, or I am.
Because they wouldn't even say the name out loud.
Exactly. The Chinese call it the flow of the Tao, and Hindus call it the Maya, which means the play or illusion of Brahman.
It's like an actor on a stage suddenly realizing they aren't just playing Hamlet, Like they wake up mid-scene and realize they are the playwright, they are the stage itself, and they're the audience watching it all at
That's
once.
it, exactly. The boundaries disappear.
But wait, I have a final critical question about this.
Let's hear it.
If everything is just the cosmic play of the universe, and we are all just God playing hide and seek, doesn't that philosophical view run the risk of apathy? Like, why care about human suffering if it's all just an illusion?
It's a valid question,
Mm.
but according to Watt's sources, the result of this realization is the exact opposite of apathy.
Really? It doesn't make people just detach and not care.
No, it generates immense warmth and connection. Think about it. If the boundary between you and me dissolves, your suffering is my suffering.
Oh, I see. Because there is no other anymore.
Exactly. Watts cites the example of Kabir, the great Hindu-Muslim mystic. He basically said Kabir saw the beloved in all eyes.
Wow, the beloved in all eyes. That's beautiful.
It really is. The evaluation of God shifts from an external judge waiting to punish you to the inherent fabric of every single human interaction.
So God isn't looking down at the play. God is the connection between all the actors.
Right. God is the interaction itself.
Man, that is a huge shift in perspective. So just looking at the whole arc of this deep dive today, we started with the historical deconstruction of biblical authority, right? That whole idea of human councils curating texts, which is obviously a massive point of interest for any atheist or skeptic.
Absolutely. Taking away that objective skydropped authority.
Right. And from there, we move to Watts's radical redefinition of divine inspiration, moving away from the dictator God toward this completely nonverbal, mystical, internal experience.
Which is distorted by the human vehicle.
Yes, the sound systems. We reviewed how our cultural sound systems warp those universal experiences, changing how we label ultimate reality, whether we call it God, the Tao, or just cosmic consciousness.
It all comes down to the vocabulary we are handed at birth.
Exactly. And honestly, for you listening to this right now, I really want you to reflect on your own sound system.
Yeah, that's the real takeaway here.
Think about it. How much of what you deeply believe, or on the flip side, what you skeptically reject, is entirely dictated by the vocabulary and the culture you just happen to be born into?
It's a little unsettling when you really dig into it.
It is, because you assume your thoughts are purely your own.
Right, but they are shaped by the language you use to think them, which leaves us with a final lingering question to ponder on your own.
Lay it on us.
If every deeply held religious text and every profound spiritual moment is ultimately filtered through a limited, distorted human vocabulary, is it ever possible for humanity to communicate the absolute truth? Or are we destined to forever argue over the translations?